The Tang Dynasty from 618 to 907 AD was one of the great peaks of Chinese civilization. It was a time when a confident empire looked outwards and enjoyed vibrant cultural exchange with the rest of the world. The sansai, or three-colored glaze, invented in the Tang Dynasty, characterizes the pottery of that era. Among its rarer items is this model of a courtyard residence. The model shows the front and rear courtyards of the complex. But perhaps the most fascinating part of it is kept safe in trees grown on these mountains in miniature with birds perched amid the branches. It forms a template still followed to this very day. There are few written records of Tang gardens, excepting the poetry of that period. Xi'an was once the capital of the Tang Empire. This street is lined with lamps decorated with Tang poems. They all celebrate one particular location. The Qujiang Pool is now a lake in Xi'an's city center. In the Tang Dynasty, the city was known as Chang'an. It was a magnet for the wealth and talent of the empire. Hopes and dreams, romance, drama and disappointment all had a place in the streets around the lake. Wang Wei was one of the greatest poets of the Tang Dynasty. He passed the highest level of the imperial examination system at the tender age of 20. His career as an official went through ups and downs, but in 755, it would witness one of the greatest dramas in China's history. The capital was captured by rebel general and Lu Shan's army. Wang was taken prisoner and forced to serve the usurper. As the rebels celebrated victory, An Lushan asked the royal theatre to perform for him. Musician Lei Haiqing refused and smashed his instrument. An was furious and had him dismembered on the spot. Charged with grief and indignation, Wang Wei wrote a poem in memory of Lei. The Lantern Festival, which falls 2 weeks after the Chinese New Year, is also when tribute is paid to the god of theatre. Every year at Quanzhou in China's southeast Fujian province, they further celebrate the memory of the principal Lei Haiqing. The Kaiyuan Temple was built during the Tang Dynasty and is the oldest in Quanzhou. In its great hall there are carvings of flying apsaras carrying musical instruments. The instruments are similar to those used in Tang times. Today, these types of instrument are used in Nanyin, a musical tradition that only survives here, in the far southeast of China. It's the closest we have to the music of the Tang era. Creative concepts are formed from one's heart-mind and the poetry of one's environment. Wang Gengsheng has been a garden landscape designer all his life, and he's born and bred in Quanzhou. His dream is to build a garden to match those described in Tang poems.
我小时候，我们一家住在水头镇上，一座很老旧的房子里面。我经常看家里小桌上的一个茶盘，茶盘中画着石头，还有泉水、松竹、明月，还写着“明月松间照，清泉石上流”。
Walk the streets of Quanzhou and you'll see many of the houses bear the same four characters above the lintel. It means the occupants are descendants of the three brothers Wang who developed Fujian at the end of the Tang Dynasty.
这个部落是由太原到山东琅琊，然后又从山东琅琊到河南固始县，然后固始县再到福建来。王审知他们三兄弟就带领了64姓部将，这64姓部将到福建来就开发福建，他们就没有再回到河南去了，所以这64姓就变成福建的始祖。
83-year-old Fu Shunyi is an expert on local folk culture. He knows all about the local proverbs, songs and origins of their family names. He says that most of the residents of Quanzhou came from Henan province.
泉州方言是从河洛那边过来，就是黄河的洛水之间，我们叫做河洛方言，也是河洛文化。因此晋人 迁徙到这边定居，所以这条江就定名叫做晋江。
Quanzhou was founded on the banks of the Jinjiang. It's famous for its well-preserved connections to the Tang era. There's even a saying which goes, for buried relics, look to Xi'an. For living culture, see Quanzhou. You can get some sort of picture of life in Tang China by looking at Quanzhou. The people here inherited a Tang culture and preserved their ancestors' lifestyles in their own unique way. The elder residents of Quanzhou like to get together and sing Tang poems in their local dialect. Wang chose the site for his retreat with extreme care. It was about 50 kilometers from Chang'an and 60 kilometers from the Zhongnan Mountains, famous for their hermits. This careful positioning shows that Wang had not lost all interest in an official career. It also shows that he wanted to commune with nature. Coming and going as he pleased, Wang maintained a hermitic lifestyle, but never fully cut his ties with the secular world. Wang's choice was common for those who run into trouble in their official career. Today, many make the same choice, searching for inner peace. Zhang Jianfeng lives in Xi'an. He founded a magazine called Ask the Way and claims to have interviewed more than 5,000 hermits living in the Zhongnan Mountains. These hermits have all, to some extent, been influenced by Wang Wei and his thoughts.
这个辋川图卷呢，是明朝的那个知名画家仇英绘制的。这辋川，反正我是觉得文人应该都很神往。我们探访了好多次，把这个就是名画里的辋川跟现实生活中呢，一一做了一个梳理跟注解。
Zhang has rented a piece of land near the Zhongnan mountain and built several thatched cottages there. He spends half of every week there relaxing with friends and enjoying the peace and quiet.
Today 早晨鸟叫的时候就起床了，因为这个鸟啊，它能感受到自然的气。气最好的时候就是该动的时候，鸟动的时候也是人动的时候，因为人的动静要合于自然的动静。
While staying at Wangchuan, Wang Wei developed his understanding of the relationships between people and nature, gardens and cities. To him, a life in nature and one of worldly affairs were no longer contradictory, but part of an organic whole. Wang Wei would be pardoned for his reluctant association with the rebels and rose to become a deputy prime minister in his final years. Though he would not live to see peace fully restored across the empire, he had at least that modicum of solace in his Wangchuan villa. In this poem, Wang uses 5 types of perception: special, temporal, visual, auditory, and emotional, to introduce readers to his world. His garden is the reflection of a poet's artistic vision. Wang captures the details in nature to make the picture more vivid. Wang not only uses the garden to express his thoughts in his poems, but he also uses poems and paintings in the designing of his garden. It is his influence that has left Chinese garden design as an expression of a particular artistic vision. Wang started a trend that caught on among the literati. His garden at Wangchuan was a stepping stone in bringing nature from the wilds of the mountains into the cities. The garden Wang Wei built for his retreat and solace would not only influence later generations of literati, it would also become a model for many imperial gardens. For hundreds of years, Wang Wei's bucolic idyll attracted countless writers, artists, monks, and officials. They often traveled long distances to pay their respects to the artist and experience the beauty of the location that inspired him. In the 1960s, many factories were built in Wangchuan area, and the mountains were badly damaged. Today, it is hard to find any trace of Wang Wei's magical landscape. His lasting resting place is entombed beneath the factories. Legend has it that Wang Wei himself planted this ginkgo tree. The tree is 2 meters wide and 25 meters high. A sentinel on this spot over the ages, it has witnessed all the vicissitudes of China's history. The Wangchuan villa may be gone with the wind, but it still blows in the imagination of those like Wang Gengsheng, inspired by Wang Wei's poems.
这首诗中隐含的意境和诗人所要抒发的情怀，我不大理解，但诗中所描述的优美景象，足以让我陶醉向往。
Given the limitations of scale that he faces, Wang Gengsheng is looking to create a miniature version of Wang Wei's world.
Chuẩn Trúc Quả Hiển San Liêu
Bai Juyi wrote his 600-character Song of the Lute in the wake of his dismissal from an official post. It intermingles indignation with a mournful ecstasy. We are both unhappy to heaven's end. We each understand the other. Our meeting is more than mere chance acquaintance. Bai sees in the fading bloom of the mature singing girl a fate that resembles his own, once celebrated, now neglected and despised. Bai's career thereafter was to be a series of recalls and retreats. Bai was something of a social reformer. His memorializing to the emperor in protest at the conditions suffered by the common people made him enemies at the court. This saw him removed from office on more than one occasion. However, posts as governor of Hangzhou and later Suzhou witness that his talents were not altogether overlooked. Towards the end of his life, he restored part of the Buddhist temple at Xiangshan, near the Longmen Grottoes, just south of Luoyang. Living there, he took to styling himself the Hermit of Xiangshan, indicating his increasing reclusiveness as he set about collecting his literary works, many of which referred to his infatuation with nature. Balance in life is crucial. Bai was able to resolve the contradictions between official and reclusive lifestyles. He redefined the way that Chinese people view nature and sought to incorporate it into their daily lives. His works expressed themselves in an accessible style that became part of Chinese vernacular. Bai compared his poems to trees. The roots were emotions. The first shoots were in odd phrases, while the final form gave fruit to the full meaning. The flower is not a flower. The mist, not mist. Coming at midnight, vanishing at dawn. The rising sap of a dream of spring. How long to be? It's lost without trace, like the morning cloud. In 1971, the tomb of one-time Tang Crown Prince Li Xian, the Prince Jianghuai, was unearthed in Shanxi. Among the tomb decorations was a mural showing court ladies holding what today we call penjing, or bonsai. Today, Chen Hannong of the Chinese Penjing Artist Association is looking for new raw materials for his creations. They occupy almost every minute of his life, as well as every corner of his home.
园林呢，其实就是把那个盆景把它放大，当然那就其实就是园林了。那这个园林就把它缩小了，就是变盆景了。不管您看到什么材料，然后再去构思，但是你平时也把它构思一点也可以。你一发现那个材料，那你就高兴得不得了了。
Chen has a profound understanding of the Chinese gardens depicted in the Tang poems and uses this in his bonsai creations.
一个接触这个，你就会有一点的那个审美观，你肯定会的。每一个人都懂得美，特别是女人。我跟你说，那女同志、女朋友真的是，她很会打扮。其实你平常你注意她是怎么样打扮，那你就会打扮这些了。 真的是会这样。
Chen has no fancy education, but has devoted himself to Penjing, and has created many astonishing examples. Nature can seem far away in our big modern cities, but these small works of art bring it closer. Our pursuit of beauty is not limited by size, only by our imaginations. Penjing is a medium in which we can all create our own world from our innermost thoughts. Wang Gengsheng builds his version of the Bright Moon Tang Garden in his home. Bai was a generous host and he liked to share his good fortune with others. He would invite guests to lavish parties of feasting and drinking with wine, women and song all included on the menu. Bai himself once stated that after 9 days of hard work, the 10th should be spent in merrymaking. How else could one cope with the responsibilities of office? This non-contemporaneous painting depicts the gathering of the 9 elders of Xiangshan at Bai's home on the 24th of the 3rd month. It seems odd to think that the success of the Chinese garden was rooted in failure, the thwarting and premature termination of so many promising official careers. But as the social elite turned their backs on public careers, they refined and invented a sublime compensation: the private garden. Bai was a prolific writer, composing around 3,000 poems. In one he writes, "I was crazily drunk and eager to create, so I sang sad poems from noon to dusk." Bai was nicknamed the monster of verse, in contrast to Wang Wei the saint. At the end of his life, Bai's poetry was introduced to Japan, where it would shape the aesthetics of Japanese garden design. Near the end of his life, and knowing his days were numbered, Bai ordered his singers to return to their homes. He likewise tried to sell his horse, but it whinnied and refused to leave. The singers refused to go too. But Bai had determined to die alone in the peace of his garden, amidst the last butterflies of autumn. It's autumn again, and Wang Gengsheng's Tang Model Garden is near completion.
我现在还很纠结，是不是从此之后不做了？做了这个景观，到底能证明什么？能说明什么？你搞这景观，你能吃吗？能换小车吗？有的时候就一直想，明天我就不管它了，明天我就要到哪里去散心了。结果明天早上早起来，又想走之前再看一看，糟糕，一看又走不开。
Gazing at the realization of his dream, Wang Gengsheng smiles like a child. Freedom and natural romanticism transcend the ages, touching the essence of what it is to be human. The Chinese garden itself has evolved through the ages. Once the pride of emperors and tea magnates, they now form havens for the urban middle classes, retreating like Wang Wei to their oases of solitude. However, purposes may differ, and for Wang Gengsheng, the greatest joy is to share his model Tang garden with his children and grandchildren. The Tang Dynasty was the first great golden age of the Chinese garden. Tang gardens were poetry in rock and water, flora and fauna. They both inspired and were inspired by the literary giants of their age. They served as sanctuaries for scholars wounded by the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. In our modern age, we both seek perfection in miniature and on a grand scale in communal public parks. But however we define it, the healing power of nature is a blessing for all to share, as it has been throughout the centuries, in times of joy and, even more so, in our darkest hours.